All right, I think we're going to get started. Hello, everybody. My name is Erin Gu. I'm the Chief Education Officer here at InGenius Prep. I'm very happy to have with me tonight Susan Shifflett, who's a former admissions officer from Yale. I will let her introduce herself very quickly.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Erin. We're so delighted to be with you here today. As Erin mentioned, I formerly worked as an assistant director of undergraduate admissions at Yale. And I've been with InGenius Prep for about 2.5 years. I live in the Washington, D.C. metro area, and we're just looking forward to sharing with you all just some of our thoughts. We know this is a really challenging time for many of us, so I'll turn it back over to Erin.
Thanks, Susan. So let me introduce myself real quick. Like I said, my name is Erin. I'm the Chief Education Officer at InGenius Prep. I oversee all of our counseling work with our students, and also I'm originally from the DC area as well. Went to high school there before attending college at Dartmouth. And I'm happy to be here tonight to help answer some questions you students and families might have about how to face the corona situation now that we're in an unprecedented situation, and with a lot of schools canceled, a lot of students and families are asking how to adapt to this new sort of environment and situation. So with that, let me introduce our topics for today. So we will be covering, first we'll talk a little bit about ingenious, who we are, what we do, and then we will dive into how applications are processed and will admissions offices be impacted by the virus, based on our knowledge and experiences, what we think might happen there. And then we will talk about how you can better prepare given the likelihood of the impact on college admissions process. And then last but not least, we'll have some ideas, concrete ideas about projects and resources for our students, for those of you attending that you can use for your students. And then we'll have Q&A at the end as well. So please stay tuned. All right. First of all, InGenius Prep is founded at Yale. I'm actually here in New Haven right now. And we have a very large team of what we call former admissions officers. So these are folks like Susan, who have worked inside admissions at the top universities in the US, like Johns Hopkins, like Harvard, like Dartmouth, like U Chicago, NYU. So these folks have brought insider perspective and based on their experiences at these colleges to really help us understand what higher education institutions are looking for in their admissions process. On top of this vast network of former admissions officers, we also have a large team of what we call graduate coaches. So these are folks who are graduates of top programs themselves. So they attended Yale or attended Dartmouth or Penn or Columbia, and oftentimes have a lot of experience with multiple degrees and with experience working with students, and especially coaching students on their writing and creative thinking. So we have graduate coaches that also work with our students to help apply the insights that we learn from admissions officers to their work in their application process. In addition, we also have a large network of professors, scholars, and researchers in subject-specific fields who can help our students really understand and explore further in their academic field of interest. So they work sometimes one-on-one, sometimes in small groups with these mentors, and students are able to work on their own projects and advance their own understanding in their potential area of interest. So from all these folks, we are able to develop cutting edge curriculum from everyone's experiences and school specific insights from every top 30 university. For example, how sort of U Chicago might prefer a different order of the activities list from what Harvard prefers, and these kind of insights that we're able to gain from our former admissions officers. We have systematic and operational curriculum, which makes our services quite different from our competitors who might just be connecting a student with a counselor and sort of allowing them to work out on their own. Instead, we provide our counseling teams a lot of guidance on how to make decisions and how to guide a student so that it's more supported from the InGenius team as a whole. And we use that to really guide our work with our students. In 2019, so this is last year's results. This year's we're still waiting and tallying because the results are coming in 2 days from the rest of the institutions. Last year we had 33 Ivy League acceptances, 39 top 10 school acceptances, and over 250 top 30 acceptances. That's across approximately 200 students that we worked with last application cycle. And we had students accepted to every top 15 school and 100% accepted to schools on their target list. And one student in particular that got into a top 20 school had the lowest ACT of 29, which was quite impressive and unusual for most admissions decisions for top 20 schools. All right, so that's a little bit about InGenius and what we do and who we are. And with that, I would like to turn over to Susan, who will walk us through, how applications are usually processed in the admissions office and any things that we think might or may not change as a result of the coronavirus situation.
Great, thanks so much, Erin. So as Erin mentioned, let's talk about whether or not you know how applications are reviewed in the admissions office. You don't have to type in the chat, just think in your mind, yes or no. And then we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so how are applications processed? It's really interesting because even though every school has their different personalities and maybe different specific traits that they're looking for, in terms of how applications are processed in the top tier schools, it's fairly similar. So we have this schematic that can help us to sort of follow this through. So let's say you are from the Washington, D.C. area and you submit your application. Let's say your name is Stacy. So Stacy submits her application, let's say to Yale. So what will happen then is there will be a pile of these thousands of applications, right? And they're sorted by region. So what happens is there's usually just one or two admissions officer that covers each region. It's pretty surprising when you think about some of these schools like Stanford or Yale or Harvard. You think that it's going to be like this huge admissions team, but they're actually usually fairly small. So what happens is it gets sorted by region. When I was at Yale, I read the Northern California region. So that meant I read every single application that came in from the Northern California region. So if you went to a high school in that area, then I would read your application. The next part, you see this little nice picture of this person. That admissions officer is going to then review, let's say the admissions officer at Yale, let's say his fictional name is John, who reviews the Washington, D.C. applications. So he would be the one that would then read Stacy's application because she goes to a high school in the Washington, D.C. area. And really what your job is that you want to turn this admissions officer into an advocate for you, because essentially the admissions officer acts somewhat like a filter, where they actually are figuring out which applications they're really going to present in front of the admissions committee, which is this last little icon triangle that you see. The admissions committee at a place like Yale can really vary. It can be just a few people up to more complicated cases. Maybe we'll have more than a dozen people in the room. They're comprised of senior admissions officers, professors, school administrators, and basically the admissions officer goes through all the applications. And so while everybody can see the ratings of the different applications that you've given them, typically there's some sort of numerical rating that's associated with it, the admissions officer really will only pause to speak in greater detail about the applicants that he or she is going to advocate for. So what Erin and I are going to be talking about for the rest of the presentation is, how can you become that standout applicant so that your admissions officer, like Tom at Yale, will advocate for you. And especially, how do you stand out in this really challenging time of the coronavirus, which is upending, a lot of students' extracurricular activities and school plans. Okay, next slide. Can we? Oh, perfect, thanks. Okay, so let's step back and talk about, whether we think the coronavirus will impact the college admissions process. I would say the short answer is probably not. What we're seeing is probably many of you are either high schoolers or parents of high schoolers. Certainly in the US, we are seeing impact in terms of schools closing or having to go to distance remote learning. As I was talking to Erin earlier, this has definitely impacted me personally. I live in Virginia. My son's in 6th grade. All the schools in Virginia have been closed for the rest of the school year. So they're trying to transition to distance learning. And I know that's the case for many of you who are across the United States and maybe even in Canada and other places as well. But in terms of how it will change the process by which admissions officers read applications, probably not. And that's because, if you can see with the third point, students submit their applications using online portals such as the Common App. So these systems are already built online. I was reading applications at Yale back in 2005 to 2007. At that point, we transitioned to online. So I mean, the colleges have been reading online in many cases for well over a decade. What we may see is there might be some tweaks in terms of timelines and deadlines, and we'll talk about that more in some of the next slides. Next slide, please. Okay, and so as we mentioned, if the pandemic continues to, still be in have a big impact, colleges will definitely move operations online. You're already seeing that probably with some of your high schools going to distance learning, and then certainly, colleges are doing that as well. Admissions officers can certainly hold committee meetings to discuss top candidates over things like Zoom. When I was at Yale reading applications during the reading season, actually we weren't required to be in the office, so I would be reading student applications from Starbucks, my apartment. I mean, this is the admissions, I guess, industry or area has already quite prepared to be working online. Next slide, please. Great. So here are just a few examples. So for instance, Bucknell University actually announced that they're going to accept more students than usual to ensure that the school keeps up a high yield rate, which means that the students they've offered admission to, the percentage of students who accept and say, yes, I'm going to come to Bucknell next year. Now, that is because Bucknell, for instance, for a lot of admitted students, they're not going to be able to attend that admit day. And so that's why they're thinking strategically, this is how they're going to adjust. Now, we don't think this is going to be the case for the Ivy League schools and other highly ranked colleges. And that's simply because these schools just have such a depth of a wait list. It's not really going to impact their ability to draw sort of the top talent that they wanted. And you can sort of read for the next 2 points in terms of what Ohio Wesleyan University and Purdue University are doing. One sort of more macro point I'd like to make is keep in mind that the way these universities are reacting, they're all very different, which I know can seem really confusing, but if you think about even the way different states across the United States are handling the pandemic, what's going on in New York City or New York State is very different than what's going on in Ohio or what's going on in Louisiana or California or Washington, and every governor is kind of having to adjust accordingly. And so you're seeing something similar with these universities as well. So it's just really important to realize that there isn't sort of going to be necessarily one blanket policy that all colleges are going to accept. They're all going to, tweak it a little bit, which makes it a little confusing, but we'll try to walk you through and help you kind of navigate some of that. Okay, so next, probably on your mind is what's going to happen with standardized testing dates like the SAT, ACT, IB, APs. So as you may have heard, March and May SAT dates have already been canceled. So we're encouraging students to go ahead and sign up for the exam in June and August. You can see the April 4th ACT test has been rescheduled to June 13th. And then all students registered for the April 4th test, you will receive instructions for free rescheduling to June 13th or a future ACT test date. Next slide. Okay, great. So one of the big news, as you probably have heard, is in terms of AP exams. So the AP program has announced that they're going to provide live AP courses for free, but the biggest thing is that they're planning on developing a 45-minute free response exam for each course that you can take online on your smartphone. You can take it on your computer. And so that's definitely going to be a change than when most people take it in person. And then here we have some of the changes that are going to happen with the IB organization. The biggest thing for you to just be aware of is that colleges are aware of all of these changes, so you can just rest assured, while it is disturbing, just take comfort in the fact that everybody, you know, who is an 11th grader is in the same shoes. Okay, so what we are seeing is in the past years, you know, schools have already started adopting different standardized testing policies, and many have gone score optional. But, you know, given the coronavirus, we're seeing some of these changes accelerated. So for instance, you can see that Chicago, you know, they're going to evaluate the applications in the context of school closures. Tufts, you know, announced they're going to be test optional for the next 3 years. Case Western Reserve University has made SAT, ACT scores optional. And then most importantly, at the bottom, you'll see that more schools are likely to implement similar protocols. And again, when you're applying to colleges, you really need to make sure that you're aware of each and every college's different requirements, because they do vary quite a bit. Okay, so the main takeaway of this section is, since college applications are submitted online, admissions offices will continue operating as usual. So we do not foresee that there's going to be significant impact in terms of the way applications are processed. And so that's why, you know, we really want to focus the bulk of this presentation about, so how do you make an impression so that you can turn your admissions officer into an advocate for you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Erin, who's going to be giving some great tips.
Great, thank you, Susan. All right, so a lot of the students and families are struggling with this transition to online learning because so much of our learning were in person before. So we'll talk through some strategies and also how you could potentially better use your time while at home. So the first thing is to find your stride. It's really important that you find your way of learning, and everybody has a different way of learning, and some people prefer notebook, maybe on top of alongside with your laptop, and others may just prefer taking notes on the laptop or on an iPad. So everybody has a slightly different strategy that they use. And so it's good to figure out what it is that works for you. And take time away from screens, especially when you're not in class. It's really easy to get sucked into the screen time and to sort of disconnect from the rest of the real world when you are forced to stare at a screen for a couple hours a day because you're taking classes online. So it's important to make time to spend with your family, to read a book, to draw something, or to just stretch or exercise, so that you're involved in the physical world that you're in as well, and to make sure that you keep up your routine, right? Get enough sleep, staying hydrated, and prioritizing your well-being, both physically and mentally, and that is the best way to be prepared for any challenges that lie ahead. The other thing is to make sure that you're familiar with the tools that you'll use for online learning, things like Zoom, which you're all familiar with, Google Hangouts. And then there are a couple other online learning tools that might be helpful, like Quizlet or FlashTab. So these are for testing yourself and your knowledge. You can make your own flashcards. You can make your own list of vocabulary words or content. You can even, for Quizlet, you can even paste a picture to help you remember a concept. Khan Academy obviously has lots of videos on different subject areas that are all free and easily accessible. They also have practice questions for some of them. And then for and Duolingo is a good place to go if you're taking foreign languages, if you are learning a second language, that is a good platform to use to help you with your learning. And then there's the productivity tools, which are helpful to help you stay organized and make sure that you're getting your things done, regardless of the mode in which you're doing them. So Google Calendar is really great so that you can block out your events. And then to-do list, Wunderlist is our list making apps that can set reminders for yourselves of when things are due. So it takes a little bit of that mental energy away from, or mental task away from you needing to remember when things are due. It will automatically remind you. Obviously, you have good note-taking options and noisily blocking a lot of noises, which is helpful, especially if your whole household is at home and there are other students or other kids or pets that are around during class time. And then Rescue Time is a cool app to help you keep track of your time, right? How are you spending your time, which is also helpful to note, because sometimes you might want to take a 10-minute break and end up taking 30 minutes or 40 minutes. And that would be good to know that you're doing that. Workout and fitness apps, which are super important to stay healthy. Wake Out, indoor workouts, Shine, and Nike Training Club. All these are good tools. And hopefully you're fortunate enough to still be able to venture outside, even for a short walk or maybe a hike in the backyard or around where you are. I think those are very important to do to help you engage physically and just be prepared and more able to focus more when it's time to learn. So some tips for parents as your student transition to online learning, making sure that they are actually following their routine, even if they don't have to wake up nearly as early, which is, always the nightmare for teenagers. I remember when I was a high schooler, always hating to get up so early in the morning. So they can slip in a little bit, but still need to make sure that they're up by a reasonable hour and that they're going to bed at a similar time. That is key to keeping the routine and having students feel like they're still in school mode. Distractions from family members, so helping them to find a space to focus on, whether that's their room, an area in the study, or an area in the living room or kitchen or dining room area, someplace that sort of is a dedicated study space. And check in with them and have them talk to you about what they did with their day today, or what they've accomplished that morning during lunchtime. So frequent check-in is always helpful to keep your student on track. We put together a sample schedule based on what we think makes sense and what we've seen with our students. This more or less follows the general day at school and has dedicated time for extracurricular activities and planning as well, and SAT or college application prep work. Now, a lot of people are asking questions about plans that are being canceled as a result of coronavirus. That includes the testing plans. So as Susan already said, that we do encourage students to register for the June and August one for the SAT as much as possible in the event that they can still happen as scheduled. And if not, then if they do get canceled, College Board will be refunding the registration fee anyway. So there's nothing to lose there by being more prepared. colleges will understand that they have to students have to make readjustments as a result of this. So, for example, when LA had the fires, university extended deadlines for students who were affected, and so the schools will be adjusting their requirements and in timelines accordingly. And to make sure that you budget in time to continue your studying for the tests. So Khan Academy, College Board, or tutoring, or additional questions that you can find that you can do to keep taking practice tests, so that you don't um, lose all the things that you've learned, and give it back to whoever that you learned them from, so that you can keep your momentum going. So if a lot of students were planning on, taking college visits and other things during spring break, or family vacation. Um, so now that's all sort of being impacted. Here are some ideas that we have put together for students that you can do on your time right now. So one thing you could do is to read and reflect on a book that's either relevant to the pandemic or a topic of interest on your own, right? If you were always interested in history, then pick up another history book. If you were always interested in physics, then read another physics related book. So making sure that you're spending time exploring your topic of interest. Take an online class. A lot of them are free. We're always free, and a lot of them have gone free now, or to offer free access for students. So this is a good time to continue and augment your learning with whatever additional resources you might be able to find outside of what your school is offering. Participate in an online volunteer or crowdsource initiative. So a lot of the students are stuck at home, and with that, the internet is the only way to communicate. And the good thing is that most of our high school students nowadays are so used to that mode of communication anyway. That's what they grew up doing, and so that is an online volunteer or crowdsource initiative. There's some that are about donating medical supplies that's related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And there are others that are sort of supporting your community members, the elderly. If you were always volunteering at the senior center, as understanding what their needs are right now, if they need people to go do a grocery run for their seniors, that is an initiative that you could join, or even lead as a result of this. And some other ideas, you can start a film club with friends and watch movies on a specific issue, and share your thoughts and feedback to just engage and do something meaningful and useful during this time. You can also visit college campuses virtually. Um, and a lot of schools actually either offer the virtual college visits through their official website, or they have the videos of student guides going through campuses on YouTube, and that could be either by the official college or by students' initiatives on their own, or by other organizations. So that's a really good way to get a sense of what the colleges are like, without having the opportunity to visit in person. And oftentimes that's if you encourage your student to spend more time on YouTube, they usually will take you up on that offer. You can also read students' reviews from different schools on platforms like Niche or Unigo, and then also reach out to admissions offices or current students with any questions. Something that not a lot of people know is that almost all colleges, through their admissions offices, will have volunteers, or current students who are volunteers, who they can connect potential and prospective students with, to answer their questions and whatnot. So sometimes it just takes you asking the admissions office if they have a program like that and if they could connect you with a current student that has potentially a similar background or interest or subject area interest or things like that. So that's a good way to get to know colleges if your spring break uh, college visits were canceled. Now, a lot of students are also working on their summer plans and thinking that that might be impacted and no longer available. So some alternatives is to look for maybe remote or online internships, right? So if you had an internship lined up, talk to them and see if they'd be able to offer that remotely. A lot of organizations, because they're also going online for their work, that it might be easier for them to do an internship with you and just move your internship remotely. So because everybody's working remotely anyway, it wouldn't really be a big impact there. So that's definitely a good option. Can also take an online class at a college. The colleges are likely to be offering summer classes online still. And when that happens, definitely look up at the opportunities there. Um, and start a remote initiative that with your group of students. It doesn't have to be big. Colleges are understanding that the resources are limited at this time, and they are looking for students who don't settle for just sitting in front of their TV and watching TV all day, and that they are creative and they have an initiative to organize a group of students to do something meaningful together. And it doesn't always have to be entirely COVID-19 related either. So if you have ideas of things that you were going to do before, try to find another online platform or way for you to do that. Um, yeah. And something else, maybe teach yourself a new skill on the side. Maybe learn how to code or pick up a new foreign language or pick up a new instrument or do art, something to sort of help you stay engaged there. Other ways to stay informed, keep in touch with your guidance counselor, who are super important in the college admissions process. They will also have more up-to-date information from colleges, and they will, you should let them know if you're doing cool projects on your own or with your students. You do want to make sure that your guidance counselor knows about that, even if you can't see them in person. Colleges will be announcing new uh, any changes to their policies as well. So keep an eye out on those. InGenius will be also collecting those and we'll be sharing that as we hear them, so that you can also monitor our platforms for additional information. And just to stay up to date on what's going on in your area. As Susan mentioned, every state is responding to this differently. And so your state might be impacted differently than others from other states. And college admissions counselor officers will know sort of the impact on your particular region when they read your school and your application. They will know sort of the particular challenges or impacts in that region. Reflective writing is a really good thing to do to prepare for your application, because ultimately that is what you are asked to do. In your application materials, you are asked to write reflectively about you, about your experiences, about who you are and how you think about the world. So take some time to write based on your reflection. Maybe you saw something that happened on the news and you have some thoughts about why that happened, or if you agree or disagree. Maybe you have you saw something that happened in your community that you thought was a good thing to do, or maybe not the best policy. So those things will be helpful, and it will also be a good documentation of your experiences during a unprecedented pandemic. And you can also start drafting your activity list, right? And see um, where you are with the activities you've already done, and to see if there are any gaps that you need to fill with the time that's left, and making sure that you are able to fill that. So, for example, if you had limited community service, or if all of your community service was in one specific area that has nothing to do with your ultimate interest in college, or to study in the subject that you want to study in college, or if all of your activities were super academic and there's nothing creative or fun or volunteer related, then you would want to make sure that you fill that gap. Yeah. So as you settle into online classes, think about ways to stay productive during the time away from physical contact with your classmates and teachers. Colleges are super aware of the current circumstances, and they will understand that you've had to adjust accordingly. And it's sort of what do you do with the opportunity and the resources that you have that they will be evaluating their application. Right. With that, we'll have Susan share some specific ideas and resources for students, and then we'll be ready for Q&A.
Great, thanks, Erin. So I just want to address, I saw a quick question that came up in the chat as Erin was talking about in our presentation, spring break, and maybe how that relates to admissions. So for those of you who might have joined a little later, overall, we don't think the actual admissions process will change, but the reason that we were talking about like spring break and summer plans are these are all things that can be put into your activities list. So before I jump in about specific examples, one of the biggest misconceptions that I think InGenius we see in our students is oftentimes, when you go to activities list, you feel like, oh, I have to write debate club or key club, but actually some of the really powerful activities can be things like independent research that you do online, or if you're let's say you, for instance, have extra family responsibilities, like you need to take care of your siblings or things like that. Those are all things you can put on your activities list. So definitely think outside of the box. So for instance, one of the examples Erin had spoken about is like taking an online course. So let's say you're getting really interested in, I have a student I'm working with who's really interested in behavioral economics. Take courses on behavioral economics, and that's something that you could potentially put on your activities list. You've taken X courses on behavioral economics, including here, X, Y, and Z. So that's just to kind of tie together kind of why we're talking about some of these ideas and how, it directly could impact admissions. So I think one of the mindsets that, we really want students to adopt during this time is understandably a lot of us think of the coronavirus as a barrier, right? Like we're self-quarantining, there's all these things we can't do. But I actually think the coronavirus is really a leveling playing field for college admissions. It's a time for the most creative and independent students to shine. So what we're going to talk about is, where are the opportunities? Because as an admissions officer, like I was always trying to think about when I was reading applications in the back of my mind, I'd been trained to think, okay, which student is going to make like the most lemonade out of lemons, or which student is going to maximize the resources that they currently have. So you may feel right now like, oh, I have really limited resources, but that's exactly the point. The admissions officers want to see like, okay, so yeah, everybody has, definitely to different levels of extent, but to a certain extent, we are all in this together. So, which are the students who are really being creative and figuring out ways to still have an impact on their community? Okay, so talking about ongoing extracurriculars, I would say like in this section, I want you to think about like 2 or 3 activities that you are really engaged in. So for some of you, like you might think, okay, I do a lot in art and I do a lot in terms of volunteering. For another person, it could be like you're really into science and you're really into robotics. So just keep in mind like 2 or 3 of your top strengths because in terms of what you want to do, it's very individualized. So there's no one size fits all, which is why at InGenius, like, oftentimes we're working with students, like a lot of the students I work with are sophomores or many times with juniors starting around this time before we get like really heavy into the application counseling season so that we can sort of tailor these projects so that they can really help you stand out based on your strengths. So just some examples, we just want you to think about what are the extracurriculars that you're currently working on. And so what can you do, in this situation, whether you're, transitioning your club to kind of an online situation where you're doing discussions or there are other activities that you could maybe continue on a more limited basis. Next slide, please. Okay. And just so you know, some of what I'm talking is, it's going to be related, but maybe not directly on the slide. So there's sort of two major areas that I would recommend when you're like right now is, one, you're going to have to be very creative. But two, I actually think starting out local is probably one of the best things you can do, especially if you don't want to have, any chance of, if you are in a place where it's safe and you and your parents feel like you're able to do some limited, like community service, it's probably going to be local because you're not going to be wanting to travel much at this point. So for instance, you can see there's an organization that was started by two 20-somethings. Actually, one of them is a current junior, I believe, at Yale, called Invisible Hands, where basically they started a service where you can sign up and volunteer, and people who are at risk, who needs deliveries delivered to their home, can sign up. And so you can basically volunteer and go to the local grocery store and then deliver it to somebody in your neighborhood. So there's a lot of these like niche projects that are coming up, and you can just Google it and you'll see it in the news. The second point on this slide is talking about if you want to host a podcast or film content. So I don't know if you have a special skill that you want to, share with the public, you can do that on YouTube. Let's say like you're a trumpet player. Like this would be a perfect time for you to maybe, if music is your big thing, it's an opportunity. You can try something different in music, right? Like maybe you can pick up the ukulele, you can order it on Amazon, and then you can just watch YouTube videos for free and pick that up. And that's something you could put on your activities list. So yeah, those are just some things to think about. Next slide, please. Okay, so for this slide, I think first we've sort of covered points 1 and 2. The third one is the one that I think we'll focus on. So one thing you can really work on is research. So, and this is actually something we also do at InGenius Prep is, as Erin had mentioned earlier in the presentation, we have this group of experts, professors or practitioners. So you may find that this is a time where, whether it's related to COVID-19 or not, like you really want to, go deeper in a specific niche topic and maybe write a short paper afterwards, or maybe you want to, write a series of blogs. So let's say, for instance, you're somebody who's really passionate about animals and like you do a lot of work with animals. Maybe like you're really interested in, how did COVID-19 this is probably not the right scientific word, but like jump from like animals to humans. That might be something that you could take a look at, and take a look at the history of other pandemics where we had something similar. And so, that's an option. You could certainly do that on your own, or if you're interested, you could certainly connect with us and see, whether, we probably do have an expert that you could do research with. And again, that's something that could end up in your activities list about this independent research that you did. Next slide. Okay, so let's get some even more specific ideas. So let's say that your area of interest is journalism. Like let's say your name is Tony, you live in Ohio, you write for your student newspaper, but obviously now, maybe your student newspaper is closed. Like what do you do? So actually, I think there's a huge opportunity right now. You can pitch an op-ed from a teenager perspective. Certainly if you have something very newsworthy, you could shoot high for like the New York Times and Washington Post. All of them, share publicly, like how you pitch. It's an email, you pitch them, or, you could do something more targeted to a teenager audience. And if you can't find an outlet that will publish, you can self-publish. I think Medium's a really great platform. And again, this is something that can go onto your college application. Actually, right now, if you go to the New York Times, I think like an hour ago, on their front page, they're soliciting teenagers, like in terms of wanting to hear from you directly about if your plans have been upended. So if you want to have a chance to be quoted in the New York Times, this could be your time. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so we talked a little bit about, for instance, like if you were a science person and animals and wanting to study about how viruses have maybe like jumped from animals to humans. But let's say you're somebody who's interested in art. So in this case, you could definitely, like it says here, take a look at the effectiveness of music and arts during times of crisis. But maybe you're inspired by like this time to do like a series of like paintings that have to do with like pandemics or, and that's something you could post on your Instagram. And then in terms of how you would show that in terms of your college application, you can, post on the description of the activity, like the number of followers you have in Instagram, the number of views that you got. So all of these things can be reflected on your college application. And then next slide. Okay, so we probably won't go into too great of detail for that, just so that we have time for Q&A. But so in terms of tips for staying focused on your projects, I think Erin covered a lot of it. The only thing I think I would add is I'm a really big fan of this product. I don't get commission, called Time Timer. You can find it on Amazon, but basically it's like this manual clock where you just manipulate with your hand, and it shows like you can go up to an hour, but it's just, if you look online, you'll see it's very visual. And I find that's really helpful at home if I'm having a hard time focusing. All right, next slide. Okay, so the takeaway is that even though your extracurriculars may have been disrupted, you have the time to dedicate to self-directed projects, as well as working on initiative that captures different aspects of the coronavirus if you want to. As Erin mentioned, like it doesn't have to be coronavirus related. If it's something you're naturally interested in, sure, but don't feel like it has to be COVID-19 related. I mean, honestly, like right now, one of the activities a lot of people can do is gardening. So like maybe you can work on like, I don't know, helping out like your community garden, or just, plant new crop varieties in your own backyard. I mean, there are very creative ways that you could end up using this for your college application, whether it shows up in your essays or whether it shows up in your activities list. So I think with that, I'll turn it back to Erin.
Thanks, Susan. Susan made a great point in terms of the connecting the dots between what you can do and to college admissions. And just to summarize really quickly in terms of changes that we think we'll see, we'll probably see more schools going test optional, given the impact on the SATs and the ACTs. So that's likely a trend that we'll see. We'll also likely see potential adjustments to timing and the strictness of the requirements for subject tests and whatnot. But right now, in terms of the process itself, we don't anticipate that changing. So it'll still be read by region. You'll have admissions officers that read a lot of applications from the same area. So your local context and your high school context will matter a lot. And it's all about what you do given the resources and opportunities that you do have, and what kind of initiatives that you are taking as a result of this. So now is a section for Q&A. We've gotten some questions over Zoom, and we also got some ahead of the time. So I will take a question about, can you give a concrete example of leadership if honors society are all canceled? I would say that this example of leadership is the same as I would have given if we weren't in this situation, which is that honor societies are not a marker of leadership on its own, and that it is about what you do that demonstrate your role as a leader. So very much so in terms of organizing a group of students, accomplishing a goal together, changing the way that a club has been run, right? And to go a new direction, and being able to accomplish that goal with a group of people, that is leadership. And so you can do that in a variety of ways. You can do that by adapting the current clubs that you're involved in, or by starting a new one. So I think that is something that I would have, it would be the same answer regardless of timing.
Erin, do you mind flashing back to, it looks like we had two people who wanted us to put the computer science slide back up. Sorry, skipped over that one. We can talk briefly about that one. Just want to make sure enough time for computer science or for question and answer, but clearly this is a very important slide. Okay, so let's go back to this one. Go ahead, Erin. Mm-hmm.
No, I was just going to say, the slides will be available. We are recording this, so we'll make these recordings available as well.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. So, okay, so it sounds like we have a few computer scientists out there. That's awesome. I don't have that skill. So some of the ideas we have listed here. So you could create an app or program that helps people record the number of coronavirus cases in their area. So this is an area where I think it's perfect in terms of talking about going hyper local, because like you're not going to be competing with like the New York Times that has like this macro map, right? But there isn't a lot actually if you go hyper local. So for instance, like I live in Fairfax County, but it's not that easy within my county to see like what exactly is the breakdown, within the different towns and things like that. So that's a resource that you could do. And you could even, then pitch it to your local newspaper once you have it up and just saying like, hey, here's a resource that I've put together, if that's helpful. Another thing I was thinking about that you could, I actually am like hoping that somebody will secretly pick up this idea, especially in my area. So there's, many of us are now turning to takeout, right? Like, but the thing is, it's really variable in terms of like Starbucks, like the Starbucks we have like multiple Starbucks when you're where we live, but only one of them is delivery. But like, you can't really figure this out unless you go into each each different store. And then there's another chain, like local sandwich chain we have in our area, where the one closest to me, I just found out today, like they closed down. I think they don't get a lot of business, but one across town does. So like that's something you could do, which is pretty unique, where you could, whether it's maybe not an app, but, maybe it's something you could just post online, an article for your local area. Like, hey, these are the businesses that are open. All the hours of these different businesses are constantly changing. So it's really hard to keep track. So that could be an awesome resource that you could potentially get a lot of impact on. So, you could write reviews about like your takeout experiences. Try to be positive because these restaurants are trying to stay alive, but you can talk about the differences between them. And maybe that's something you share like within like your, the local area. So definitely think locally, because there's so much going on locally that's changing so much that like no one can really keep track of. And I think there's really an opportunity for all you smart and innovative high schoolers to get in there and then make a really cool project that will really stand out in terms of college admissions.
Maybe a question on how do you think colleges will handle elevating grades and GPA, since approximately a third of the school year has been disrupted? So I guess the question is sort of, if the grades were no longer as strong of a differentiating factor, right? Either the teachers become more lenient all across the board, or a school goes pass fail instead of giving letter grades. Like, how do you then differentiate yourself academically from other students? Susan, you have thoughts on how that might get read in an admissions context?
Yeah, I think I think Erin also mentioned on this earlier, is you're really read within your school context, which is why admissions is organized regionally, because the admissions officer will be familiar with your school. They're going to be reading all the applications from your school, all the, applications from the surrounding schools. So you're not being compared to, like, if you're in a like rural Ohio, you're not being compared to somebody who's at like a prep school in like New York City. And so similarly, your cohort, your peers, if, a third of the school year has been disrupted for you, that's also probably very likely, for all your classmates, right? And so that's something that, that will be taken into consideration.
Yeah, I think for students that have always been a strong student, I think that will show through the 9th and 10th grade and early 11th grade transcripts, and hopefully have an opportunity to also show that through your 12th grade transcript. So I think it has actually paid off for you to be a consistent student that has challenged yourself intellectually and achieved those achievements. And I wouldn't worry as much about that as a result. If you are a student that we're hoping to make improvements on your GPA in 11th grade. In that situation, you will need to do some extra work to demonstrate your intellectual capabilities and also determination. So things like signing up for additional online classes, looking for other learning opportunities will be a good way for you to demonstrate that you are now very serious about your academic learning, and to be able to showcase that through the rest of your application rather than your grades. Okay. We have another student that asked, or another person asked a question, is there any concern that there might be too many essays focused on COVID-19? I will let Susan speak to this, after, but I think from what I understand from an admissions officer perspective, they're reading these applications back to back all day, every day for weeks. And they get tired of the same topics that includes COVID-19 for this year. So it definitely is not advisable for everybody to write every single essay on COVID-19. I think poor admissions officers want to spare them that repetitiveness. But it also does not mean that you cannot talk about it, right? So if you did an activity that's related, and because it is timely, it is good to mention that somewhere in your application. I do think that you probably want to have even like a minor mention of one small activities to show that you did something related to a global issue from your particular perspective or angle in your own way. But I don't think that it should be the prominent feature of your application for every single student. I think that's a bad strategy as well, because that will make everybody seem the same, and then the one person that doesn't do it will stand out, and that is probably the one that will get admitted. So don't do that for your applications.
Yeah, spot on. I think what Erin said is exactly right. There's certain essays that I remember I read so many. There was like the sports injury essay, the torn ACL for soccer. I mean, and look, these are serious things. I don't want to make light of it, but you just have to realize there's a lot of other people that are going to be writing the same thing. So you really need to think about like, what are you writing? And it's like, unless you have a very unique angle, it's going to be very difficult for you to write about a sports injury, unless you can do it, but you just need to make sure you have a very unique angle, because otherwise there's a lot of people that write about things like that. So yeah, don't go overboard with COVID-19 unless it's something you really care about.
We had one question about how recruitment policies might change for international students, if they would or would not, especially for sort of Canadian students. I attended a forum with current administrators and employees inside colleges earlier last week, and I actually asked this very same question, because I was curious as well. And most of them were not really thinking about it yet. It seems really far in advance that they're still trying to figure out how do they enroll the next class for the students that are getting offers right now. So I don't think there has been any decisions, but the things that they did share were that having international students is an important part of the diversity that colleges are looking for on their campus. So I don't think that will be changing as a result. And also international students bring a different kind of financial tuition payment to the table as well. And that is something that colleges are probably going to have to be very careful about if they're going to lose that. So for the time being, I think it sounds like most colleges are not thinking about drastically changing their international admissions policies, but we'll be monitoring that fairly closely for the international students that we work with. Let me see. There are other questions. When students asking about SATs, is it a disadvantage to compete against students who took SATs and I have not? Do I need something very special to compete? Susan, you want to talk a little bit about standardized testing and what their roles are in the overall admissions process usually?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say it certainly depends. I think, we talk a lot about kind of like to our students, we talk about the threshold score, which is basically like once you reach a certain score, it doesn't really matter so much like how much higher you go. Like, is there really a big difference between 1510 and 1530, or like between 1200 and 1230? Probably not. I think that, I guess the question is there a particular reason why you aren't taking the SAT one? If you think you can score decently well, we usually encourage students to, now if it really, whether it's a financial reason or just, standardized testing really, relatively for you is really a weakness, then I think it's okay. I would say for international students, standardized testing is really important just because sometimes it's not as clear to admissions officers kind of how. I think it's a benchmark that, is pretty more familiar to a lot of admissions officers. So, I mean, I would just encourage you to think about like, why are you not taking it? Again, you don't have to, but I do think that it gives just an extra level of comfort to the
I think
admissions
it's
officer.
because if they're canceled for some reason,
Oh, if
they
they're
continue.
canceled. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if it's canceled, I mean, look, everybody again is in the same boat, and I think admissions officers will be aware of that. And if anything, you can put under the additional information section of the common application and just explain, you weren't able to take the SAT because it was canceled, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I do think that Susan's point about colleges looking at the testing as a data point, and the fact that they are likely to not have that as much this year, it means that they will weigh the rest of the application even more. So you'll need to find other ways to demonstrate your intellectual capacity and curiosity through outside of testing if it continues to be impacted and students are not able to take any SAT or ACT tests before October.
Yeah.
The new AP exams this year with colleges discounted. I think Susan can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in terms of college admissions, AP scores were never like a focal point of the admissions process. I think it goes your GPA, then your standardized testing, and then like AP and SAT2 scores in terms of like importance. So certainly your usual grades are much more important. And I think the colleges will understand that the same AP scores are being given, what tests are being given to everybody. And so it's once again, one of those things that everybody faces the same challenges and is in the same boat. And so colleges will understand that. I don't know if they will discount that or if they'll give different policies for college credits. I think College Board is working really hard to make sure that the AP classes that students have been taking can still give them the credits that when they signed up for, they're expecting when they sign up for it. So I know that College Board as an institution is probably working closely with colleges right now to make sure whatever 45-minute online free response question that they come up with will meet the criteria of allowing students who score well there to get the college credit that they were planning on getting. I do think the other question is, do you think more colleges will waive SAT2, those who require or recommend them? Yeah, I do think so. I do think that with the with more testing being impacted, I think colleges will relax their requirements here. All right. we're a little bit over time, and so I wanted to honor everybody's time with us, and just to share a quick cap of our results so far at InGenius for 2020. Here are the admissions results that we have had with our students for the top schools, and with more rolling in every day. I think Northwestern and Carnegie Mellon just released theirs, and Williams College released their results this year, today. And for our work with students, we work with students as early as freshman year in high school, and really help them think about how they strategize their extracurricular activities, how to stand out in the admissions process, what activities to pursue, how to demonstrate leadership, and to really have the skills to be a leader, and to be an effective leader. And through our mentorships and writing class, and also some internship opportunities, we can work with a wide variety of students and helping them get through this process, and just be a guide and mentor, and someone who can offer some additional insight in an otherwise chaotic or stressful period of time for every family. So if you're interested, please contact us. If you have further questions, let us know as well, and monitor our blogs and WeChat and other platforms to stay tuned. And wish everybody the best of luck with everything, and stay healthy and stay safe during this challenging time for all of us. So we'll see you next time.
Stay safe. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.